Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Today, we are going to talk about QA in agile organizations. In today's environment, many organizations are confused about the role of QA. They want to call themselves agile and then ponder over what to do with their QA engineers. Believe me, every organization can do better with specialized QA engineers if their roles and responsibilities are aligned with agile principles. Now, part of the reason why these roles and responsibilities are become ambiguous is because they're confused about the difference between bug and a defect. So let's start with that. It is worthwhile to illustrate what has helped me and many companies distinguish between bug and defect. There are just a couple of subtle differences in there. As a definition, a bug is a coding error in front of the customer, okay, that exist in production or similar customer-facing environments like staging or UAT. A defect, on the other hand, is just an issue found while testing. A bug needs prioritization, which means that it goes back as a backlog item to the product backlog, and product owners, they have to decide how it competes with the functional, technical stories, etc. A defect, on the other hand, is part of the development cycle. So it's part of the story. You may encounter many defects as you're doing development in the story. And before you close the story, you're expected to close all those defects because that's the right thing to do as per the definition of done. Your story has to be production ready. Okay, so now that we have understood this difference between bug and defect, let's just circle back to the role of QA in an agile organization. Well, in many companies, I have seen even today, there are QA engineers that are rewarded for finding bugs. A role of QA in an agile organization is not to find bugs, but to prevent them. This concept is so fundamental, let me just repeat it. The role of QA is not to find bugs, but to prevent them. No one in the organization should be getting rewarded for finding bugs. While the development cycle, the work that you do in the development cycle, QA engineers may find defects or issues linked with the stories the development engineers are working on, and they're expected to get those issues or defects fixed before the story closes, like I said before. Any defect that is found after the development is complete is what mature organizations call escape defects. So in other words, bugs are escape defects. Something that you should have found as part of the story while you were doing development, while the patient was on the table, but somehow you did not find them. They got leaked into the software that was shipped to the customer. Now, escape defect, by the way, is a very, very good metric to be tracking in an agile organization. Because over time, as the team matures, you want to see a downward trend in escape defects or bugs. Now, interestingly, as you might already be wondering, practical life is not that straightforward, and you're right. So let's look at some of real life practical situations and see what we can do in order to prevent bugs. Okay, so I'm going to go over a broad category of 4 situations here, and most of your confusion would go away because your scenarios will probably land on any of these 4. So let's start with the first one. Let's say your team closed about 20 stories in 3 sprints, and you're ready to release this awesome business value work that you did to the customer, and out of nowhere this defect shows up. What do you do? Okay. Now, the first option is that you can find the QA who was supposed to prevent it, and you hang them publicly, make an example of them. And of course, I'm just kidding. We are working in an Agile workshop, and one of the main values is that there's no blame. So let's talk about other options. One of the options could be that you can count this as an escape defect or a bug. So actually create a bug and send it to the product backlog, where the product owners will go and prioritize it. Okay, that is just one of the options. The other option is that you actually find out what is the severity of, I'm sorry, actually what you can do is you treat this as a defect. You decide based on severity. If it is very high, you want to fix it before the release. And by the way, all the regression issues, they are automatic priority. They should not be sent as stories to, or they should not be sent as bugs or stories to the product backlog. So in other words, the right thing to do here, if it is a severe defect and you still haven't shipped the software, you have still some time left, you might want to scramble to fix it. Okay. Now, this is a situation what I call as last minute surprise. Let's move to the second situation. Let's say you are in the last hour of the sprint now, okay? And there's one story which had 3 total scenarios or 3 acceptance criteria, and out of those 3, only 2 are complete. When I say complete, 2 of them are production ready, they are tested, but a third, some edge condition, is not ready, and it is time to close the sprint. What do you do? Okay, option number 1, again, is you find the developer, you hang them publicly, and again, I'm joking, there's no blame. That's not an option. So one way to deal with this situation is that you don't take credit for that story and let it slip to the next sprint. In other words, you're not taking credit now, but you're taking credit later, because hopefully it'll get finished in the next sprint. You'll finish the third scenario because you've finished 2 of them already. Now, another option could be that you carve out another story for the remaining scope. For that third acceptance criteria, you can carve out a story just for that and send that to the product backlog. And the product owner can decide whether you should take that up in the next sprint or not. Now, in this option, there is a conscious decision that has been made between the product owner and the team what they should do. And it is completely up to their discretion what they would want to do. But keep in mind, the important thing here to note is that you're not opening a bug. There is a conscious decision that is made by this smart collective group to carve out a separate story. or to punt it. Okay, so I just want to reiterate the fact that a bug shows really bad on the organization. Now, this situation is what I call as compromise or functional debt, right? In case you are carving out another story for the remaining scope. Okay, let's move on to the third situation. While you're doing demo on the last day of the sprint, many small UI related issues are pointed out by the attendees. For example, a table column is misaligned, some button is slightly off center, there is some special character validation that is not implemented in the text box. Now, what is a way of dealing with these kind of issues? And believe me, you'll find a lot of these happening. One option is that you can actually create a bug for these or escape defect for these, stating that you can containerize all these small UI irritant into one container bug and decide to take it up in the next sprint or whenever the product owner thinks it would be the right time to take up. In my experience, another smart option is to add these trivial things to one of the upcoming stories in the coming sprint. Because these issues are very trivial, they should not upset the estimates of these stories. So what happens is that you are essentially still doing the work and counting it as an acceptance criteria for the upcoming stories. And you're going to do it soon because you're putting that in the stories that are coming in the next sprint. Now, if you can come up in this options, you can argue that, okay, I don't really have any stories where these UI irritants can go fit. So in that case, you may fall back on that option. You can create an escape defect or a bug in your backlog and decide to take it whenever your product owner suggests. I like to call this situation as small adjustments. Let's talk about our final situation. A customer is complaining that the page loads are taking a long time, or they are receiving some kind of timeouts when they're making API calls. So essentially a latency issue or a performance issue in a customer facing environment. Usually these kind of issues, they are funneled through customer support, tier 1, tier 2, and so on, which is kind of a pretty typical support structure in most of the organization. Now, these can become severe very quickly if not handled properly. So let's say in this example, this latency example, on further investigation, you find that the customer was experiencing this because of some extraordinary load on the system at that time, or there was some kind of a data condition that got invoked, which hogged all the CPU or the memory, causing a spike in the system. Now, what are we supposed to do in order to prevent such scenario in future is a question. So from my experience, this is a perfect time to immediately create a text story or a non-functional story, whatever you want to call it, with a proper acceptance criteria. Again, my suggestion here is to stay away from creating a bug, because once you create a text story, you will be forced to think through and be inspired to fix the core of the problem at the root, rather than just trying to fix the narrow scenario of the bug situation. Needless to say, all the tech and the non-functional stories, they go to the backlog, they get prioritized in the usual way, compete with the prioritization of the functional stories or bugs. I like to call this situation as tech story or non-functional story, very simply. Now, just an added point on this number 4 situation, you may, other examples of these are, there are some kind of a data bootstrapping problems, configuration problems. Those, they can also fall in these categories, which are, you can have situations that are only, or issues that are only appearing in a certain environment and not a code error. So they also fall in this situation. Okay, so most of your scenarios that you may encounter on a day-to-day work in your Agile workshop, I am certain they would fall in any of these 4 situations. If they don't, you are better off creating a bug in your system. So I would rather have a bug in the system, right, than having nothing at all or no traceability at all. Okay, but again, I would want to end the session by just saying that, bugs, they reflect badly on the organization. Role of QA is to prevent bugs, not to find them.